3 rings of dragon's teeth, 12 kilometers of minefields, reinforced concrete bunkers housing over 800 Russian soldiers, and one phrase intercepted on Russian communications that said it all: nothing gets through the southern lock. They were wrong. March 2nd, 2026, 3 a.m. Zaporizhzhia Oblast, south of Tokmak. Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade launches a combined arms breach against the most fortified Russian defensive complex on the southern front. 9 hours later, the southern lock doesn't exist anymore. This is the story of how Ukrainian engineers, infantry, Bradley crews, and drone operators dismantled a fortress that Russian generals called impenetrable. And they did it with precision, innovation, and a flanking route the enemy never saw coming. I'm your host at UkraineSignal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down one of the most significant tactical breaches of 2026, a textbook combined arms operation that exposed everything wrong with Russia's static defense doctrine. Because building a fortress means nothing if the enemy finds the one door you forgot to lock. Let's start with the ground truth. By late February 2026, Russian forces belonging to the 42nd Motor Rifle Division had spent nearly 4 months constructing what they believed was an unbreakable defensive barrier south of Tokmak. The position sat astride the road to Melitopol, a strategic artery that connected the southern front to Crimea. Whoever controlled this corridor controlled supply lines feeding tens of thousands of Russian troops. The Russians knew this, so they built accordingly. The outer ring consisted of triple-stacked dragon's teeth, reinforced concrete pyramids arranged in staggered rows across a 2-kilometer front. Behind them, engineers had laid an estimated 4,000 anti-tank and anti-personnel mines in overlapping patterns designed to channel any advancing vehicle into pre-registered kill zones. The second ring, positioned roughly 600 meters behind the first, featured deep trenches connecting reinforced firing positions. Each position housed AGS, 17 automatic grenade launchers with overlapping fields of fire. These 30mm grenade launchers can saturate a 100-meter area with fragmentation in seconds. Russian doctrine placed them in pairs, ensuring that any infantry attempting to cross the gap between the first and second rings would face a wall of shrapnel. The third and innermost ring was the command layer. Concrete bunkers, some buried 3 meters underground, housed battalion command posts, ammunition reserves, and medical stations. Communication trenches connected these bunkers to vehicle revetments sheltering T-72B3 tanks and BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles. Russian commanders had pre-registered artillery coordinates covering every approach, with 152mm howitzer batteries positioned 7 kilometers behind the line, ready to deliver fire within 90 seconds of a call. Which weapon system was the most critical to breaching these defenses? A. Bradley fighting vehicles, B. HIMARS precision rockets, C. FPV drones. Drop your answer in the comments. On paper, it looked impenetrable. Russian officers reportedly told visiting inspectors from Moscow that the southern lock could hold against a brigade-sized assault for 72 hours minimum, buying time for reserves to arrive from Crimea. Intercepted communications from late February revealed a garrison commander boasting that Ukrainian forces would bleed out in the minefields before they ever see our trenches. But Ukrainian intelligence had been watching. For 6 weeks, reconnaissance drones, small, quiet quadcopters flying at altitudes that evaded Russian electronic warfare, had been mapping every detail of the defensive complex. They cataloged bunker positions, identified ammunition storage sites, tracked patrol patterns, and most critically, they found something Russian engineers had overlooked. Southeast of the main defensive line, a marshy corridor stretched for roughly 1.5 kilometers. Russian combat engineers had surveyed this area in December 2025 and classified it as impassable for armored vehicles. The soil analysis showed waterlogged terrain with a bearing capacity too low for anything heavier than a light truck. The 42nd Division's engineering officer signed off on the assessment. No mines were laid, no dragon's teeth were placed. Only a single observation post with a thermal imaging system covered the approach. Ukrainian planners saw an opportunity. Between February 15th and February 28th, Ukrainian engineering teams conducted covert ground surveys of the marshy corridor during nighttime windows when Russian drone activity was lowest. What they found contradicted the Russian assessment. A frozen substrate layer beneath the surface mud, hardened by an unusually cold February. could support tracked vehicles if they moved quickly. Bradley fighting vehicles at roughly 33 tons sat right at the edge of feasibility. The key was speed. Vehicles couldn't stop or they'd sink. The plan came together in the final days of February. Brigadier General Koval, commanding the 47th, designated 3 assault elements. Task Force North would conduct the main deception attack against the western face of the defensive line, exactly where the Russians expected an assault. Task Force Center would push engineering vehicles through minefields to create breach lanes. And Task Force South, 2 platoons of Bradleys carrying dismounted infantry, would execute the flanking maneuver through the marshy corridor. Stay with me. What happens in the next 9 hours reshapes the entire southern front. H hour was set for 3 a.m., March 2nd. Temperature, -4 degrees Celsius. Overcast skies with low cloud cover that grounded most Russian fixed-wing reconnaissance. Wind from the northwest at 12 kilometers per hour, important because it would carry smoke southeast, directly into the defensive line's thermal optics. At exactly 3 a.m., Ukrainian artillery opened the operation. This wasn't random shelling. This was a carefully choreographed 90-minute artillery preparation that served 3 distinct purposes simultaneously. First, M109A6, Paladin self-propelled howitzers, 6 of them, began firing smoke rounds into the western approach. Within 10 minutes, a dense chemical smoke screen blanketed a 300-meter-wide corridor, blinding Russian thermal imaging systems along the western wall. Russian defenders reported to their battalion command that visibility had dropped to 0. They assumed an assault was imminent from the west. Second, HIMARS launchers positioned 18 kilometers behind Ukrainian lines fired precision-guided M31 rockets at the pre-identified ammunition storage sites within the 3rd defensive ring. Each M31 rocket carries a 200-pound warhead with GPS guidance accurate to within 2 meters. 4 rockets struck in rapid succession. The first hit a buried ammunition bunker on the northern edge of the complex. The explosion was massive. Secondary detonations from stored 152mm shells continued for 11 minutes, forcing Russian troops in adjacent positions to abandon their posts and seek cover. Third, and most devastatingly, Ukrainian forces deployed DPICM cluster munitions against the trench network connecting the second ring's AGS-17 positions. Each cluster round dispersed 88 sub-munitions across an area roughly the size of a football field. The effect on exposed trench positions was catastrophic. Russian soldiers caught in open trenches without overhead cover suffered severe casualties. Post-battle assessment would later estimate that this initial bombardment neutralized roughly 30% of the AGS-17 positions before a single Ukrainian soldier crossed the line of departure. Russian artillery responded at 3:14 a.m. Their counter-battery fire was directed almost entirely at the western approach, where they believed the main assault was forming. 152mm shells hammered empty positions that Ukrainian planners had deliberately left as decoys. Old vehicles, inflatable tank mock-ups, and thermal signature generators that had been placed days earlier. The deception was working. At 3:30 a.m., Task Force Center began the most dangerous phase of the operation, breaching the minefields. 2. Bradley M2A20DS, fighting vehicles equipped with mine plow attachments, led the advance, their steel blades cutting through frozen earth to push anti-tank mines aside. Behind them, a Soviet-era IMR-2 combat engineering vehicle, a tracked machine built on a T-72 chassis with a hydraulic crane and dozer blade, cleared debris and widened the lanes. The mine plow Bradleys advanced at walking pace, roughly 4 kilometers per hour. Russian defenders in the first ring, partially blinded by smoke but alerted by the noise of approaching tracked vehicles, began firing blind with AGS-17 grenade launchers. 30mm grenades detonated around the engineering vehicles, shrapnel sparking off armor plating. The lead Bradley took 3 direct grenade hits to its frontal arc. None penetrated. The aluminum composite armor held, but the mines were the real threat. Despite the plows, the mine density was extreme. At 3:47 a.m., the IMR-2 struck an anti-tank mine that the plow had pushed laterally rather than clearing completely. The detonation blew the left track clean off the vehicle, immobilizing it in the middle of the breach lane. The crew, 4 Ukrainian combat engineers, immediately dismounted under fire and began manual mine clearance around the disabled vehicle, working with prodding rods and handheld detectors while grenades burst within 50 meters. It took them 23 minutes. 23 minutes on their hands and knees in frozen mud, probing for pressure plates while the sky above them flickered with explosions. They cleared a bypass route around the disabled IMR-2, allowing the remaining vehicles to continue. Every one of those engineers survived. Their actions would later earn them commendations for valor. By 4:15 a.m., Task Force Center had carved 3 lanes through the outer minefield, each approximately 4 meters wide. Losses so far: 1 IMR-2 immobilized, 1 Bradley with track damage but still mobile. No crew casualties. The engineering phase was ahead of schedule. How many vehicles did Ukraine lose during the entire 9-hour breach operation? A4, B7, C12. The answer comes at the end. Now came the critical moment. Task Force South. At 4:20 a.m., 8 Bradley fighting vehicles carrying 48 dismounted infantry began moving into the marshy corridor southeast of the Russian defensive line. Each Bradley weighed 33 tons. The frozen substrate beneath the mud had been measured at a bearing capacity of roughly 35 tons, a margin of 2 tons. If any vehicle stopped for more than 30 seconds, it would begin to sink. The platoon commander, a captain identified in Ukrainian reports only by the call sign Viper 6, had briefed his crews exhaustively. Maintain 8 kilometers per hour minimum. Do not stop for any reason. If a vehicle becomes stuck, the rest continue. The mission depends on reaching the far side before Russian defenders reorient. The Bradleys moved in a single file, tracks churning through half-frozen mud, engines at high RPM. Russian electronic warfare systems in the area detected the electromagnetic signatures of the vehicles, but misidentified them as Ukrainian logistics trucks moving behind the front. The marshy corridor wasn't supposed to be a combat approach, so the EW operators didn't flag the contacts as threats. At 4:38 a.m., the 4th Bradley in the column hit a soft patch. Its front end dipped sharply, tracks losing traction as the frozen layer cracked beneath the weight. The driver gunned the engine. For 4 seconds, the vehicle barely moved, mud spraying from the tracks. Then the frozen substrate caught again, and the Bradley lurched forward, regaining speed. The crew later reported those 4 seconds felt like an hour. By 4:55 a.m., all 8 Bradleys had cleared the marshy corridor and were positioned on firm ground, southeast of the Russian Third Ring. They were behind the enemy's primary defensive orientation. The 42nd Division's bunkers, designed to face west and northwest, now had 33 tons of American-built firepower sitting in their blind spot. Viper 6 reported to brigade headquarters with 2 words: rattlesnake, rattlesnake. The code word confirming the flanking force was in position. Subscribe to UkraineSignal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happened next is a masterclass in combined arms warfare. At 5 a.m., the operation shifted from preparation to assault. Task Force North, positioned along the western approach, had been maintaining a visible presence, engine noise, radio chatter, thermal signatures, to keep Russian attention focused in the wrong direction. Now, they escalated. 3 Bradley platoons advanced toward the first ring of Dragon's Teeth, firing their 25mm M242 Bushmaster chain guns at identified fighting positions along the western wall. The 25mm high-explosive rounds tore into sandbag positions and shallow bunkers. Russian defenders, already battered by 90 minutes of artillery, now faced direct fire from multiple directions along the western front. Battalion commanders in the Third Ring ordered their reserve platoons to reinforce the western positions. Troops that had been sheltering in the concrete bunkers moved through communication trenches toward the western firing line. They were walking directly away from the real threat. At 5:30 a.m., Task Force South attacked. 8 Bradleys crested a low rise and opened fire simultaneously into the southeastern face of the 3rd defensive ring. The Russians had no prepared positions facing this direction. No Dragon's Teeth, no minefields, no pre-registered artillery coordinates. The Bradley's 25mm guns shredded the unprotected rear areas of the Russian position. Ammunition crates stacked beside bunker entrances detonated. Vehicles parked in revetments designed to protect against western approaches were exposed broadside to the southeastern fire. Two BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed in the first 60 seconds, their thin side armor offering no resistance to high-velocity 25mm armor-piercing rounds. Simultaneously, Ukrainian dismounted infantry, 48 soldiers from the 47th Brigade's elite assault companies, advanced on foot toward the bunker entrances. They moved in four-man fire teams, covering each other's advances with suppressive fire. Each team carried Javelin anti-tank missiles, RPG-7V2 launchers, and thermobaric grenades designed to clear enclosed spaces. The first bunker fell at 5:37 a.m. A four-man team positioned a thermobaric charge at the ventilation shaft and detonated it. The blast wave inside the confined space neutralized the defenders. The team entered, securing documents and communication equipment that would later provide valuable intelligence on Russian defensive planning across the entire southern sector. If you believe tactics win wars, type UkraineSignal in the comments. Russian command reacted at 5:42 a.m., 12 minutes after the southeastern attack began. Intercepted communications captured the battalion commander's transmission to division headquarters. "They're behind us. They came through the marsh. We need immediate artillery on grid reference." The coordinates he gave were for his own third ring. He was calling fire on his own position, a sign of absolute desperation. Division headquarters denied the request. Shelling your own fortified positions violated standing orders. Instead, they ordered a counterattack using the reserve tank platoon. 8 T-72 B-3 tanks sheltered in hull-down positions 1.5 kilometers north of the complex. The tanks began moving at 5:55 a.m. Ukrainian drone operators spotted them immediately. A flight of 6 FPV kamikaze drones, each carrying a shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating the T-72's roof armor where it measured only 20 millimeters thick, launched from concealed positions 2 kilometers east. The first drone struck the lead T-72 B-3 at 6:02 a.m. The shaped charge detonated on the turret roof, penetrating directly into the ammunition carousel, the T-72's well-known fatal flaw. The autoloader stores ammunition in a ring beneath the turret, and any penetration into this area ignites the propellant charges. The resulting explosion blew the turret completely off the hull, sending it spinning 30 meters into the air. The crew of 3 was killed instantly. The second drone hit the third tank in the column 7 seconds later, striking the engine deck and igniting the fuel cells. The tank burned for 3 hours. The remaining 6 T-72 B-3s scattered, breaking formation and attempting to find cover behind terrain features. But Ukrainian M109 howitzers, receiving real-time targeting data from observation drones overhead, began dropping 155mm precision rounds onto their positions. Each round, guided by GPS, landed within 5 meters of the target coordinates. Over the next 18 minutes, 3 more T-72 B-3s were destroyed, 2 by artillery and 1 by a Javelin missile fired from a dismounted team that had advanced to within 900 meters. Of the 8 tanks sent to counterattack, 5 were destroyed and 2 were damaged badly enough that their crews abandoned them. 1 escaped by reversing into a tree line and powering down its engine to reduce its thermal signature. Back inside the defensive complex, the situation for Russian defenders was deteriorating by the minute. Task Force Center, having pushed through the breach lanes, was now engaging the second ring from the west. Task Force South held the southeast. Russian troops in the second ring's trench network were caught in a crossfire they'd never been trained for. At 6:30 a.m., Ukrainian forces captured the first section of the second ring. Russian soldiers in adjacent positions began surrendering in small groups, 3 here, 5 there, emerging from trenches with hands raised. Intercepted communications revealed that junior officers were making independent decisions to surrender because they could not reach their battalion commander, whose command bunker had been cut off by Task Force South's advance. By 8 a.m., Ukrainian forces controlled approximately 60% of the second defensive ring and had established fire control over the remaining positions. Russian artillery continued to fire, but without forward observers to correct their aim, most had been killed or captured. Shells fell inaccurately, some landing dangerously close to their own surviving troops. At 9:15 a.m., a second Russian counterattack materialized. This time, the 42nd Division committed its final mobile reserve, a reinforced platoon of 4 T-80 BVM tanks, accompanied by 2 BTR-82A armored personnel carriers carrying roughly 40 infantry. They approached from the northeast, a direction that offered better concealment through a series of low ridges. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones detected the formation at 7 kilometers. The 47th Brigade's Fire Coordination Cell had exactly what it needed: HIMARS 2 M142. HIMARS launchers, repositioned overnight to firing points 12 kilometers behind the front, received targeting data at 9:22 a.m. At 9:24 a.m., 6 M31 precision-guided rockets launched in 2 salvos. Each rocket accelerated to Mach 2.5, covering the 12-kilometer distance to the target area in approximately 30 seconds. The rocket's GPS guidance brought them onto the advancing column as it moved through a narrow passage between 2 ridges, a natural choke point the Russian commander had failed to recognize. The first salvo struck the lead T-80B-VM and one BTR-82A. The second salvo landed among the infantry who had dismounted after the initial explosions. The column ceased to exist as a fighting force in under 40 seconds. What would NATO have done differently at this stage? Would a different approach to the Marsh corridor have been more effective, or was the risk justified by the result? Comment your analysis. By 10 a.m., organized Russian resistance inside the defensive complex was collapsing. Individual bunkers continued to fight, but the command structure had disintegrated. The battalion commander attempted to withdraw his headquarters staff through a communication trench leading north, but Ukrainian infantry from Task Force South had already seized the trench junction. He was captured at 10:17 a.m., along with 14 staff officers and enlisted personnel. The document seized from his bunker revealed the full scope of the Southern Locks defensive plan, including minefield layouts, artillery pre-registered targets, and communication frequencies for 3 adjacent defensive sectors. This intelligence would prove invaluable in subsequent Ukrainian operations along the southern front over the following weeks. At 11:45 a.m., the last organized Russian position in the third ring, a reinforced bunker housing a platoon of roughly 20 soldiers, surrendered after Ukrainian forces demonstrated a Javelin missile lock on their position and offered terms via loudspeaker. The soldiers emerged one at a time, hands visible, many visibly shaken. By noon, the 47th Mechanized Brigade held positions across all 3 defensive rings. The southern lock was breached. The numbers tell the story. Russian losses during the 9-hour operation were severe. Confirmed destroyed: 5 T-72, B-3 tanks, 4 T-80B VM tanks, 2 BTR-82AS, 6 BMP, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, 3 AGS-17 positions, and 2 ammunition storage sites. Personnel losses were estimated between 190 and 230 killed, with over 100 captured, including the battalion commander and his staff. The dollar value of destroyed Russian equipment exceeded an estimated $45 million. Ukrainian losses were significantly lighter: 1 IMR-2 engineering vehicle immobilized by a mine, 2 Bradleys damaged but repairable, and, critically, fewer than 20 wounded. No Ukrainian soldiers were killed during the breach itself, though 3 would later die from wounds sustained during the consolidation phase. Real tactics. Real consequences. UkraineSignal. Intercepted Russian communications in the aftermath painted a picture of institutional failure. Division headquarters demanded to know how Ukrainian armor had penetrated through terrain classified as impassable. The engineering officer who had certified the marsh as vehicle-proof was reportedly relieved of command within hours. Senior officers exchanged blame through encrypted channels that UkraineSignal's intelligence was monitoring in near real time. Most damning was an intercepted conversation between 2 Russian colonels, recorded at 2:30 p.m. on March 2nd. One asked, "Did anyone actually check the marsh in February?" The other responded, "The assessment was from December. No one went back." A 4-month-old soil survey, never updated, never verified, had been the foundation of the entire defensive plan's southern flank. The breach opened a gap approximately 3 kilometers wide in the Russian defensive line south of Tokmak. Over the following 72 hours, the 47th Brigade and supporting units exploited this gap, pushing elements 4 kilometers deeper into Russian-held territory and threatening the supply route connecting Tokmak to positions further south. Russian forces were forced to divert 2 battalion tactical groups from other sectors to contain the breach, weakening their positions along a 30-kilometer stretch of the southern front. Ukrainian commanders had achieved exactly what combined arms doctrine prescribes: a localized penetration that created cascading effects across the entire operational area. So what did this battle teach us? First, static defenses remain vulnerable to combined arms breach operations when the attacking force achieves surprise at the tactical level. The Southern Lock was strong in absolute terms: 3 rings, thousands of mines, overlapping fires. But it was brittle because it depended on a fixed defensive orientation. When Ukrainian forces attacked from an unexpected direction, the entire system collapsed from the inside out. Second, intelligence preparation of the battlefield remains the single most important factor in modern warfare. The 47th Brigade spent 6 weeks studying every detail of the Russian position. They identified the marshy corridor. They verified ground conditions. They planned deception operations to fix the defenders' attention in the wrong place. By the time the first artillery round fired, the battle's outcome was already largely determined. Third, engineering operations under fire are among the most demanding missions in modern combat. The Ukrainian engineers who cleared the breach lanes, and especially the crew that dismounted under grenade fire to bypass the disabled IMR-2, demonstrated extraordinary courage and professionalism. Without them, the entire operation would have stalled. Fourth, Russia's continued reliance on static defensive complexes without adequate mobile reserves and without verifying terrain assessments is a systemic vulnerability. The Southern Lock fell not because it was poorly built, but because it was poorly conceived. A fortress with a blind spot, defended by troops who trusted paperwork over ground truth. Fifth, the integration of Western weapon systems: Bradleys, HIMARS, M31 rockets, M109 howitzers, Javelin missiles, with Ukrainian innovation in drone warfare and tactical planning, created a combined arms capability that the 42nd Motor Rifle Division simply could not match. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Now, the answer to our earlier question: how many vehicles did Ukraine lose during the 9-hour breach? The answer is B. 7. 1 IMR, 2 combat engineering vehicle immobilized, 2 Bradleys damaged by mine fragments and grenade fire, but both later recovered and repaired, and 4 additional vehicles that sustained minor damage during the consolidation phase. None were total losses except the IMR-2. Compare that to Russia's confirmed loss of 17 armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned, and the asymmetry becomes staggering. 3 questions to consider. Was the decision to route Task Force south through the marshy corridor justified, given that a single soft patch nearly swallowed a Bradley? If that 4th vehicle had become stuck and blocked the column, the entire flanking maneuver would have failed. Could the 42nd Motor Rifle Division have prevented this outcome by conducting updated terrain surveys and positioning even a single minefield to cover the southeastern approach? A few hundred mines might have changed everything. What would you have done differently? Would you have committed more forces to the flanking route, or kept the main effort on the western breach lanes where the engineering assets were concentrated? Subscribe to UkraineSignal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The fields south of Tokmak are quiet now. The dragon's teeth still stand in their rows, cracked and scorched, monuments to a fortress that lasted less than half a day. Burned-out T-72 hulls sit where their turrets landed dozens of meters away. Their autoloaders detonated from above by drones that cost less than a used car. The bunkers are empty, their concrete walls scarred by thermobaric blasts, classified documents long since removed by Ukrainian intelligence teams. And somewhere in a Russian headquarters, an engineering officer's career ended over a soil survey he never bothered to update. The Southern Lock is gone, but the wrecks remain. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical arrogance without mercy. Stay vigilant.